I'm David Stifler. I'm the president of the Equifax Foundation, and welcome all today. It's our second annual summit. We're thrilled to have you all here. I think we've doubled the size from last year's summit. We have folks in from Seattle, Kansas City, Boston, New York, Atlanta, and of course a lot of folks here from St. Louis who are our core partners. You know, at the Equifax Foundation, Equifax itself, we're very much focused on helping consumers and communities live their financial best. But what we also know is that in the rental space, in the affordable housing space, that these consumers at the low to moderate income level require different solutions for their lives and different products and different services. So what today is really about is a dialogue with our key partners, with all of you, to talk more thoroughly about how we can help these consumers who are vulnerable. And what it looks like from screening to rent reporting to policy changes, and the ways that we can all work together from the public, the private, the nonprofit, what it means for us to collaborate and provide these sort of solutions. So thrilled to have you here. We have some of our great corporate partners here today. We have Patrick Hennessy from Yardi. We have a bunch of new individuals and organizations that are going to broaden the conversation we're going to have today. So with that being said, thanks again for being here. I'm going to turn over to Esther, and I should say a big thank you to Erica Wilson and to Esther and her team for helping put together this event here today. So enjoy your day.
Good morning. I'm Esther Shin, President of Urban Strategies. I want to thank all of you for being here this morning to discuss what we think is a really critical topic. I want to thank Erica Wilson, who's in the back, for coordinating. And our other USI team members who are here, Donovan Duncan, Julian Wyatt, I think Soda's going to be here later. I have a great team. They're fantastic. Erica's done a fabulous job. Really want to thank Equifax for your partnership, this convening, as well as the People's Neighborhoods Conference. So the programming that we're doing on the ground would not happen without you all. So thank you so much for your support. And again, I want to thank the attendees. So if you don't know much about urban strategies in our work, really we focus on the non-bricks and mortar components of community transformation. And so we support and work with some of the most vulnerable populations in the country, primarily in the extremely low to low income families that are primarily living in subsidized housing. So for us, we talk a lot about what we call the iceberg. So how do you move an iceberg? You don't move an iceberg chipping away at the top, the things that you see. And in our work, the things that you see are behaviors. You can't move and transform lives, and you can't get equitable results for children and families without getting into the deep and murky parts of the water, right? The parts of the iceberg that you don't see. For us, these are things like policies, right? Policies that have for decades really prevented our families from succeeding. And we see rental solutions as one of the ways that we can really help families transform their financial capacity. With rental solutions, it will change, we believe, our families, their lives for the better, and really creating some equitable results for those households. Hello. Hopefully you all can hear me now. So we are really focused on ensuring that all children and families are not only stable but also thriving, and critical to that is financial capacity building. And so, we're always really pleased to coordinate this conversation. This is our second year. Again, doubled the participation, which is fantastic, and hope to continue to grow it and continue to have really meaningful conversations around this. TREX, this is great space, so much thanks to the host for having us here. The number one complaint from last year was the space. If you weren't there with us, you don't realize it was really cold and you couldn't hear anything, and we had no AV. So this is like leaps and bounds improvement. And we've really shaped the conversation for today based on what came out of last year's convening, the kinds of things that individuals wanted to hear and talk about. So thank you again. I hope that you get a lot out of today. Please feel free throughout the day, if you've got any questions or comments, to flag myself, Erica, Donovan, or Julian, any one of us on the USI staff. So thank you, and enjoy your day. I'm handing it over now to Tyler.
Can you hear me without this? Or is it better if I had this on up here? I'll do a little both for you. So thanks all for coming here. Glad to see so many faces. Some I've recognized from before, and then some new folks as well. So thank you all for being a part of this. So somebody, a good friend of many of ours, always said you got to start these things off with a joke. Right? Can I get the crowd ready to go? So did a little bit of research and tried to find the right one that might apply well for this group. So I went on Google, tried to find something really good, and really kind of two themes came across. Number one, there's not really a lot of good folks with a good sense of humor in the tenant screening environment for some strange reason, or at least those telling jokes. I hear some from this group, but maybe not that I would share. The other one is that landlords are certainly not held in high regard. In fact, I'd say they might be just below lawyers in some minds. And no offense, Tim. I think Tim was out here somewhere. But I did find one that I think was really relevant to what we're talking about here. It's a little bit of a riddle and a joke, so I got a Smarty for the person who might actually be able to get it. So how many ants does it take to rent an apartment? Somebody's going to get this. 10. Get it? 10 ants. All right. Well, I thought it was good. But it speaks really well to what we're talking about here. Thank you, Erica. Right, because this conference is really all about the tenants, right? And I think that's really powerful because there's a lot of times that we're talking a lot about tenant screening. We're taking it from a landlord perspective, a property manager perspective, and those are all very important, of course. But today we get to talk about the tenants. And one of the areas that we actually launched at Equifax middle of last year was our purpose. And I put it up here because I think it speaks really well to what we are trying to accomplish now together as a group and at Equifax. And that is helping people live their financial best. Right, and I'm actually going to replace it, and hopefully I don't get in too much trouble from my own manager here, of saying helping tenants live their financial best. That's what we're all about here today, right? And when we're talking about helping tenants live their financial best, this is helping tenants get into properties. We know that there are some issues with getting folks on in there, especially as you look at that LMI community. We don't think screening is insightful enough to be able to provide that in an automated way. We're working together ourselves and with partners to be able to shine a light on that, get them on into it. Once they're in their homes, they need that level of security. They need to be able to feel safe, secure, that they're going to be able to stay there, they're in a good place, and they're comfortable within that. And so to the degree that we can ensure that we can keep them on in there through policy changes, through getting the right folks in the area, that's important. And then thirdly, for a person to really live their financial best, they need to be able to build wealth. And that's what we're trying to accomplish by ensuring that rental payments are making it all the way through the ecosystem. And that's a key piece of what we're going to talk about here today, because that is their biggest cost. For a lot of people, their biggest cost. And for folks who are dealing with, on average, in the LMI community, about $5,000 in savings, they don't have a lot of room to play. They need to make those rental payments relevant. So just real high level, I know many of us have seen these sort of things here before, but the overall landscape, right, we're dealing with 1/3 of the entire population. About 35% of the population, about 35% of all households are still renting. So that's over 100 million people. That's about 43 million households. So the numbers are huge. Within that, you see that from an owner occupancy standpoint, a lot of them are a little bit on the higher end, right? They're going to be a little bit older. They're saving up money. They're buying homes. But what we're finding is that some of that millennial population is staying in the rental properties a little bit later on, as shown through the graph here in the middle one. But we're also seeing some of the older generation actually start to rent on the back end of it. Right, so we've seen a little bit of a shift and change over time, but we want to be able to impact all of them. But I think the area that we're really focusing on, is this one right here, the household income. We know that for renters, approximately 2/3 of all of them fall within that bottom half of the income distribution. Right, so I think that comes out to about 30.5 million households overall in that bottom half. I mentioned only $5,000 in savings along the way. So to the degree that we can get them in their homes, help them live their financial best by feeling safe and secure and build wealth, that's what we want to be able to do. And this is big, right? There is a lot going on here. So we talked last year about kind of the 3 pillars that we're going to continue to invest on here today, and that's payments, policy, and screening. What we came out of last time was a few key themes that we're going to continue to dig on in throughout the conversation here today. But we've also made a few advancements over the course of the last year, from the first annual to the second annual. And I look forward to seeing what happens in the third and the fourth annual as we continue to grow this, right? So if we really start on the policy side, the areas that we focused in on beforehand were a focus on the masses, not the individual, and a lack of consistency and repeatability. You know, the things that I get really excited about here on the policy side of the house is there's a lot of homegrown opportunity. I see that with some of the people here in the room. We've seen that with Boston Builds Credit. Start local and build those people on up. We're seeing it with St. Louis Builds Credit, really mimicking some of the policies that Boston Builds Credit initiated. We've seen it with areas like Make Rent Count. So we've seen that in a number of different areas. We need to continue to build down on up to impact people's lives in a very appropriate way. But I've seen growth personally, being a part of some of those conversations. I know many of you are invested in that day to day, and I thank you for that. On the screening side, we know that there's still a manual disconnected set of procedures, especially in the low and moderate income level. There's a lot of manual procedures. We know some of our partners are automating a lot of that, and I applaud the ability to get down to the affordable housing sector and be able to make that more streamlined. And I've seen some of those move over the course of the last year, and I thank some of our partners, some of those sitting in our room, of doing that. We've seen a certain level of inconsistency along the way. There's still some questions of how it all kind of comes together, and we think that there's some areas that we can impact, we're going to talk a little bit about that, to be able to get folks on into those homes a lot faster. Now, all of that, right, when you have an area that might be a little bit disconnected, when you have some areas that perhaps you have thin credit or no credit areas, or you don't have a verification of income or employment, the result is deposit and cosigner requirements. And when you're dealing with folks, again, with only $5,000 in savings, it's hard for them to be able to put down additional deposit. It could be hard for them to be able to get another cosigner. So to the degree that we can build their wealth through the rental payments, through policy adjustments, and by shining a light on other areas during the tenant screening process, we have the opportunity to get some more folks into homes and help them live their financial best. Okay, and lastly is on the payment side of the house. There's a lot of folks focusing on there. We have a great panel that we're going to talk a little bit about. But we do know that the majority of rental payments are still invisible. We've been at it for a number of years. The other bureaus have been as well, but my understanding is we're still at the single digits as far as relevance goes of utilizing rental payments and really making it work within the ecosystem. We need to continue to build this on up, and we got to do it for a variety of ways. This is from the big to the small, and get everybody on board and get a certain level of consistency so we can make those things relevant. And I've seen that happen. I know here at Equifax, Chris Hobday is responsible for building that, and we've had a lot of good relationships with payment aggregators, payment processors, and partners to be able to get those data on board. And we have a few of those partners in place right here. And then we need alternate trackable ways to pay rent. So what I think about here is there's a lot of automated ways you can do it. You can attach it to your credit card, you can attach it to your bank statement, but people are paying with cash. And so how do you make cash payments to your landlord relevant? Well, we know the folks at Mocify have been able to solve for that. And over the course of the last year, been able to expand that very successfully. So those are the three areas that we're going to focus on here today. I'm going to dive into two of them. I'm going to leave the policy for the true experts. Right? I know there's a good panel on that. But let me just kind of set the table for payments and tenant screening here and how we can impact it at the low and moderate income levels. So first, on the rental payment side, it is big. Right? We've already talked about the fact that there's over 100 million people living in rented homes, that there's 43 million households renting. There's a question of, you know, how many are thin, how many are thick, what does that environment look like? Well, this graph on the left-hand side is trying to portray exactly what that is. So if you take a look at the dark green are areas that are similar as far as credit depth goes. And please jump in, Chris, the true expert in the room if I mess any of this up. It really is, it's showing those that have a true good depth, right? We utilize Georgia as the benchmark. Georgia typically is going to have some good credit background on it with the right kind of trade lines. So you can see across the country, there's a decent amount of dark green, but it's the light green that is really representing those that are less than 10% of what we're seeing within Georgia. These are the areas that we can impact. If you can actually bring those rental payments on board, you might be able to build some of these from a no-hit to a thin credit or a thin credit to a hit, right? So there's a large population here. One of the things that we did under Chris's direction is they ran a study with a rental payment data aggregator. And some of those results are shown in that right-hand corner. So I want to be able to slam home, hey, the population here is large, but what and how does it really impact that population? Well, number one, as we looked across the landscape, we found that 2 out of 10 of those who were putting rental payments on in were essentially invisible, right? We didn't see them from an ACRO standpoint or credit files. We didn't see them in our NCTUE score, which for those of you who are not familiar with them is our telecommunications and utilities environment that we have a relationship with, a consortium. So 2 of them were kind of sitting on out there that we would have been able to build up, do some work with in this new environment. That's important, that's a lot. That meant that 2 out of 3 that were unscorable beforehand are now scorable. Also very important because we can lift a lot of those folks who are paying rent. Not only that, but the score impact, while it wouldn't be expected, everybody's scores go up. Some people pay their rent on time, some do not, but we found that 54% of them, when looking at full lease term, actually their scores went up and with a greater level of precision. So this is really important. So as we are working together to bring all those rental payments on, you can see that it really is going to make a difference. Right? We can get people from non-scorable to scorable and put them in homes faster, help them live their financial best. On the tenant screening side of the house, and I know that we're going to have a panel on this one as well, so I'm going to touch a very high level. But I think it's important to note that what we did is we ran a study with a number of property managers and landlords. And within here, there's a qualitative and a quantitative analysis associated to it. The qualitative side was, let's have an open dialogue with about 24 various entities and really say, where do some of your problems lie, right? And within that, we're able to construct a quantitative approach that went out to a few hundred landlords and property managers with a selection list, right? One of those questions we really talked about were, where are some of your friction points? What are some of the issues that you're dealing during the tenant screening process? And so what you'll have here is, on the bottom part, how many are experiencing this problem, and how much of a problem is it? And there's really 2 themes that we saw along the way. The first theme was we have a lot of casual callers. You have a lot of people who are just out there, look-see-loos, or kind of taking a look at the environment. But the areas that we are impacting together in the tenant screening process to be able to streamline it, get folks in homes faster, had to do with making it go a lot smoother. This was a verification of income and employment. It can often take 7 to 10 days to go through it from a manual process, and we know there's areas of fraud associated with it as well. So we've been able to build some solutions to be able to automate that for a wide variety of folks, get folks in faster. We know that there was thin credit and no credit. We've already talked about this, right? How do we impact that positively? By looking at alternative data, and we can also collect rental payments to be able to bridge that gap, get folks in homes faster. The other big issue had to do with deposits. We've already talked about the impact. When information background is thin, they've got to be able to cover their risk through additional deposits, through cosigners. And so if we can help to eliminate some of that or reduce some of that through further insights, it's a net positive. So what that did is that helped us, and I won't make this all about Equifax, it's about the team here, but I did want to explore briefly on the type of things that we are partnering with. It helped us put together our partnership strategies. We're going to the marketplace to really impact folks, help tenants live their financial best. We put together the model that you're looking at here. Won't go through all of it, but you can see that one of the things we can do is we're always constantly examining trends. We have an environment called Ignite that is essentially all of our data collection assets all put into one, so it gives us the ability to be able to look at things like millennials and boomers on the move and what's happening within that particular environment. Where are you hitting certain thresholds, and what does that mean? How do you change it? You have a lot of application fraud and eviction rates. We want to be able to reduce evictions, and there's a number of ways that we can do that together, but at the very beginning part of it, it's making sure that we're getting folks in the right homes right out of the gate, right? Further tenant screening is going to help with that. Further analysis on the best way to keep folks on in there and keep them retained within that property is going to be really important. We're always looking at higher rates and home prices, and we've been looking at higher rates now for quite some time. They don't seem to necessarily go that direction, but we spend a lot of time on the impacts of rate adjustments, what that does to the housing sector, the mortgage sector, how that's going to translate to the renting sector, and how we can get ahead of any of those trends. And then certainly life events in single households. What I mean by this is, as folks are having kids, as they're moving around to a certain degree, as they're buying cars, what are some of those relevant connections that we can make some better decisions around? We found direct parallels, for example, between buying a home and buying a car and buying a home, right? So where else are some of those connections we might not necessarily think about specifically as it might relate to some of the LMI community to help build those on up? So within that, we've developed a number of opportunities, of which I'll outline here in just a moment. that will help us to shine the light on it. And so this is more of a takeaway. I won't go through all this, but I do just want to highlight that as we think about the full spectrum, the life cycle of the tenant screening process, it begins with attracting new residents and it goes all the way to the rental payment collection process. What we are trying to do is to work with our partners to be able to have the greatest impact to the overall community. And in this room, we're really looking at those 30.5 million households to impact positively. But working through each of these things to help automate it, get folks in the door faster, make sure they are who they say they are, verify them through automated income and employment, through NCTUE analysis, which is a score similar to a FICO, make sure we have the right background on them, try and get those deposits reduced, try and get the co-signers reduced, get folks at home and move on forward. So I know the next panel is going to be focused on this just a little bit more, led by Chris Hobday. So I'm going to pass the mic on to him, but I thank you all for your time and again, appreciate all of you being here today.